We want to talk about maximizing your youth. There is a great misunderstanding of the responsibility and purpose of youth in our modern culture and society. Too many people consider youth a time to waste, a time to be stupid, a time to collect experiences, a time to experiment, a time that has no responsibility and therefore you should enjoy yourself because this time will never repeat itself. You can go off and travel and go and walk on a boat and meet people and do all these things because you can do anything now. You're not tied down. There are no spouses, no children. You can go and lose yourself. And the problem is that many, in fact, do go and lose themselves and they never are found again.
That's true for the modern world. And it is easy to assume that when we think in the modern world, and what is the modern world? Even the United States in the 1920s, that was not the definition for youth. Don't forget the child labor laws. Children 8 years old, some suggest in the historical record even younger, were working in factories. Did you guys know that? Of course, in the 80s, there was things about children in the sweatshops in the Philippines and Indonesia, when you had famous actors and actresses producing their clothing in third world nations, or less, or a little more than world for the Philippines, but they could get it done cheap in India. Why? Children were in the shops doing the work. That was true in America before, during the Industrial Revolution. The women's suffrage movement had a lot to do with that, trying to attack the child labor laws. Now, that's for the cities, though. That wasn't referring to the rural areas. That was laws referring for manufacturing the engine. Once the steam engine came into play and railroads and skyscrapers were built, it created a different economy as opposed to a farm life. Now, what would you say if you applied the laws prohibiting children to work, which they were in the cities? The paper boys, newsboys. But would you apply that law to a farmer? He has children, and they're encouraged to have children to work the farm. Could you go to a farmer and say, your child must not be working in that field? This is not New York. This is not Chicago. This is not New Jersey. This is Kentucky. We have farms. And the children start working, 5 and 6 years old on the farm. Now, historically, what do we call that? Chores, children doing chores. And particularly the ones that were homeschooled, Little House on the Prairie. They didn't go off to the government schools, the government indoctrination centers. But as we moved from an agriculturally based economy, all kinds of things changed. It's a move. That was the AI of their day. The artificial intelligence was the urbanization. And it went into the machination of industry. And that was the machination of the language models, the cloud, the fast computation of chips. Same thing. Nothing's different. It's just being done this way. And the children then, a part of growing up, was always working. There was no way until you get older and get a job. You had a job at 6 years old, 5 years old. You were on the farm. And it wasn't a negative. And then if you go into the Middle East, war, children were going into battles. Just ask the Spartans. Children didn't have to wait to turn 21. They definitely didn't wait to turn 18. They were already being trained, and the ancient societies and empires would come, particularly the Arab, Ottoman, Sultans, Turkish. all of those nomadic tribes. When you take over a nation, the Babylonian Empire, you take the children. You bring the girls into the harem, you bring the young boys into the administration of war and service to the king in every possible area, to serve the masters as a slave and to be used for sexual enjoyment and sacrifice. The young virgin, male and female, used as sacrifice to the pagan gods in antiquity to please the gods. This is the majority of history as far as youth is concerned, particularly in the pagan driven societies. And so this country is no different than the US. In the what you may call modern times, since the Industrial Revolution, let's just call it 1950 and up, where you begin to see the laws take on a different change. It may seem like it's better, but it's just a different kind of imprisonment. And there was a saying, children are to be seen and not heard. And then it went to the point during the 60s where not only are children to be seen, children rite of passage as we were able to increase our money and our business and our way of making money. And as things begin to destroy the nuclear family, the breakdown after the wars, and the women were now working, and the children had to go to daycare. They called them latchkey kids, kids that let themselves in. TV dinners came into play, kids that had to come home and make their own meal. The schools had to make sure they ate in the middle of the day because there was no lunch that mom sent them back. Some did. I had a lunch pail. If you didn't have a lunch pail, you had a lunch bag. If you were really wealthy, you had a lunch pail with Superman or Spider-Man on it. But if you couldn't afford a nice fancy pail with your comic book heroes, your parents would send you to school with that little metal box, the way workers used to go into work in the factories with their little box. But they didn't have a box, they had a bag, the paper bag. And that's how that came about. And so children had a lot more leisure on their hands. Both parents were working. And those who could afford a butler, a maid, a babysitter, there was some oversight for the child. And you see how those things have changed? And the children were able to play more. You have the movies where they're all doing their own experiments, going off and building log cabins in the middle, tree houses in the middle of the local woods, and all kinds of different things that children were doing. They were getting into a lot of mischief. They would go off, not just for innocent fun, they would go off and play sexually. They would go off and steal things. They would go off and break things. It doesn't take long for anybody in a group of more than two to become a criminal enterprise, even as children. And you get the beginning of gangs. In fact, the Little Rascals, a nice innocent, was called Our Gang. Many of the inner city says, well, if you can have a nice little gang with a red wagon, we can have one with a Cadillac and a Uzi shooting out a window. And so you see the change with childhood and the madrasas in the Middle East. The little Arab kids are given automatic weapons and suicide bombs. So what's really childhood historically? When you can see it change and augment, is it really for that kind of frivolity?
Well, that's horrible. You put those images of all these Arab kids with the guns and suicide vests, and that is true, but what really is the difference? The difference is, I'll start with what's similar. Both are killing themselves. The difference is the Arabs are taking others with them. Because in Western civilizations, those children that go off, well, how do they end up? You have history, you can see. There's enough generations now that you can look at the results. You don't have to wonder about what kind of fruit this tree will bear. Children that go off without proper parenting will eventually lose themselves, so probably gonna take some sort of a psychedelic drug They probably are gonna go crazy. They probably are gonna become an alcoholic, and they're going to ruin their lives.
And many kids didn't have to find a gangbanger. They found their father's porn magazine underneath the mattress. They found their father's drugs in that top drawer underneath the underwear. They find their mother's devices and vices because the parents are off at work. And the children are left to rummage through the house and find the guns, find the weapons, find the drugs, find all of that questionable material.
Yeah. Children cannot be trusted. That's why you need to raise up your children. The scripture always tells the parent to raise up the child. The child is not supposed to raise himself up. He's a child. Of course he's gonna get himself in trouble. Of course he's gonna pick up the gun and play with it. Of course he's gonna look at those naked women in the magazine. That's what children do. It's like you say, you don't leave the cat to watch the cream. Children are supposed to be raised up by the parents, the father and mother. There is a reason why you need both in order to create a child, and the purpose is for the two of them to stay together and raise up that child.
To protect that child from his own weaknesses, because he's a child. He doesn't even understand his own impulses. He doesn't understand his own weaknesses. He doesn't even understand that. But you do. So why do you ignore it? He's not an angel. Oh, he's not an angel. No child is an angel. We are born in sin, conceived in iniquity. Our brains are not even done developing. It takes a while. But you're so caught up with how cute they are, how pretty they are, their beautiful eyes, or whatever it may be, that you suspend all judgment. It is still a child. And so you cause your child to be weaker than what they need to be because you're not as strong as you should be as a parent. So it's easy to blame the next door neighbor, the gangs, the television, which you're supposed to have been monitoring, the phones, the school, or some church. When the child is developed, manufactured, and programmed primarily and obligatorily in your home, grandma, grandpa, uncles, aunts, mother, father. It is your responsibility. And that's when you pass off responsibility that you're supposed to do physically, you will become weaker. Same thing in exercise. There's certain things that you should be doing that if you give it to a machine or some sort of apparatus, apart from the fact that you are injured or impaired, you will become weaker, not stronger. Because you are depending on something else to do what you should be doing mechanically and physically. And the very act of doing that strengthens you in doing that. So you don't always have to make something easier. You make it more available, more doable, but not necessarily easier. Then how does the muscle get built? So don't make it necessarily easier for your children. Make it doable. Teach them how to develop the muscles that enable them to accomplish it and to do it. These are the things that are important.
I remember we watched some documentary about this tribe that lives in the Sahara Desert, and they said that whenever they have children, they never live anywhere closer than 5 kilometers from a water source, so that the children would never get used to it. After the children are grown up, they move closer to the water, but whenever they have young children, they move away so that the children will have resilience. They will understand water is sacred, water is something to be valued and not take it for granted. See, there is something to be said about suffering. Suffering that is managed, suffering that is under control, is a wonderful thing. That's fertilizer. After all, like we started this message, what is the purpose of childhood if not to prepare you to become an adult? See, we're not having children. We're having adults that go through childhood. It's not a separate part of their life. It's the very foundation of it. The purpose to raise up a child to do what? To become a good and responsible and righteous adult, so that they can now perpetuate themselves and raise up more righteous and good adults.
Unfortunately, most do not do that because they destroy the child's development by thinking the only way to develop a child is keep him under constant high, under a constant addiction, under constant fun. He must play all the time. He must be entertained by cartoons all the time. Everything I do with the child has to deal with adrenaline, fun. And you get them, many parents get their children hooked on adrenaline because mostly all they do with them is adrenaline type activities. So the glands are already being programmed like an addict to chase the high. Everything they do is always running. Everything they do is always that, and it's dangerous. That is not how you raise a child. And many parents raise their children that way. Like a dog, they constantly keep the ball, the activity, the ball, bells, whistles, bells, whistles. No wonder they're addicted to casinos and they want to be in Las Vegas. It takes them back to their childhood. Bells, whistles, rattles, bells, whistles, rattles, excitement, 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 food, taste, fun, 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 jump, 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 jump. And what is this? An exercise class at the gym, but not an exercise class for him, the Lord, maker, creator, who gave you the child. And then all of a sudden, you do that for years, and then you tell a child, sit down and sit still in that chair. How can they sit still in the chair? You haven't taught them to sit still at home, particularly our boys. And then you wonder why. Overstimulation, even of an infant, of a toddler, is a bad baseline that is going to be programmed in them from there on. And as they develop, they always go back to that baseline. They're good 10, they're going back to that baseline. They're 12, 15, going back to that baseline. Going back to sport. And they are drawn to it because they've already been programmed.
See, you make me think about the people who say such things. We both have heard it so many times. Oh, he's young, let them have fun, very young, it's the best time of their life. Well, you gotta remember, who's the person saying this? Always consider when you hear something, who is speaking? Where does he come from? Usually, if you ever hear somebody who says something like that, that person is a failure. It is someone who failed in life that looks back to his high school glory years and that was the best time of his life. That is not someone you want to mimic. Your best should always be ahead of you, not behind you. If you're constantly looking back to your high school days and saying, you're young, you should have fun, trust me, it's all downhill from there, that's not the kind of person you want to listen to. Run.
Wow. It's the Western world too, particularly. Still around the world, most people don't talk like that. Most don't grow. You think the whole world is like Orange County or your little city. The still majority of people don't live that way. And the pockets that are living that way have been Americanized or Westernized. And so you've lost the purpose and the function of life. You haven't taught them the joy of responsibility. You've only taught them the joy of exercise, jumping, shooting guns, throwing balls, kicking balls, catching balls, jumping off of cliffs. That's where joy is. Do they see you talk about joy about your job? They see you talk about joy about your faith? No. Joy's only in being a gladiator in the Colosseum of Rome. You've got to watch a sport. You got to play a sport. You got to, come on, sport, be a sport, they say. And so we end up suspending ourselves and diminishing our ability to understand our humanity. What's AI? How is this any different? This was being done in the 40s and the 50s and the roaring nasty 20s. Yes. How is it any different? LSD, psychedelics, mushrooms, hash, hemp, cannabis, marijuana, weed, whatever you want to call it. And not to mention alcohol and nicotine. And then of course, sugar. Yeah. And then you indoctrinate, and most children now seem to go to the church of Disney, even Christians. Children are indoctrinated with cartoon and with sport. God isn't something that they see in their home, around their family. grandpa isn't praying with them. They don't see grandpa singing songs and talking to them about the things of God. Only some man they don't know once a week in some building someplace. So they're already taught this just doesn't really matter. I don't see my mother praying. I don't see my father praying. I don't even see them praying together. Apart from maybe if they even do it, maybe one day somewhere, it's not even a day, forgive me, nobody in this country gives a day to God. But you've taught them not to value. You've taught them to sit in school for 8 hours. You even taught them to sit and pray for 8 hours. You've already done this. You already are doing this. And there's no hope for the child because you don't value it. The greatest compliment of flattery is imitation. You're not modeling it. Why would a child do what you don't do? You tell them to do one thing. Dad, you don't pray. I don't see you, Mom, on your knees by the couch. I don't see you sitting at the table reading your Bible or having people over. And the people that most people do have over, that's another thing that children notice. We should love all people. They never see all people in your house, do they? They never see you with somebody from a different race sitting and making dinner for them. They never see you inviting the stranger. Yeah, what a horrible example. You can say it, but the child is saying, show me, because they're looking and they're watching and they're taking in everything. You've already programmed them. But the greatest teaching that you have, what they see you do, who they see you with, how they see you move, how they see you talk, how they see you dance, love, pray, read, study, worship God. They're going to follow you. They'll know when they see the most excitement in you, it's when you're with some girlfriend at the mall or some friend at a pool table or baseball or football game. The child already knows. Your actions speak louder than your words. They can see who do you have around them. You've taught them who to have around them. Interesting. And this whole new world that we are entering isn't a new world at all, really. It's the same principle. AI is programmed by a human, made in a human's image. Go figure that one out. Are you surprised? A human is behind it. Are you surprised that that child is that off like that? Look at who his parents are and his grandparents. Are you surprised? Don't have to be surprised. Who made it? When they talk about politicians, who funded it? Protests, who's behind it? Gallup polls and the studies or the research, who paid for that research? Ah, it's not rocket science.
But it takes intention. You have to be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't just happen. See, nothing good ever just happen. The only thing that only just happen is corruption and death and things that rot and spoil and decay. Nothing good just happen. You have to be so intentional. You know, Stephen shared with me yesterday, he spoke to a 10-year-old over the phone from Norway while he was talking to a disciple of his. His 10-year-old brother came to the phone and I asked him, what did you talk about? Why don't you share a few words?
Well, yeah, I'm talking to the older brother who now left California to go back to Norway. Good guy, very good guy. And he wanted to stay in contact with me. And he talked to me about things that he remembered I said to him and words that he says he thinks about all the time and how he's changing his life. And he was in his house when he talked to me. And of course, he says, I want to introduce you to my little brother. He was in the home with just his little brother, and he's 10 years old. And so the little brother came and introduced himself. He introduced me to his little brother. And the little brother just wanted to stay. He wanted to be a part. You know, he's in the house. He doesn't want to, go away when I talk to my friend over the phone from the United States. No, he stayed around and was walking around as I talked and kept looking and wanting to be a part of the conversation. And he asked him question. I said, well, and he says, well, tell me something in your language. I said to the young boy, I said, tell me something in your language, because he's learning English himself, and he was doing a pretty good job. In fact, he spoke English better than most English people, and that wasn't even his native tongue. Norwegian and Danish, uh, a little French, and learning English, and yet he spoke and understood English better at 10 years of age than a lot of people in America. And I asked him, tell me about himself. And I said, teach me something. I said, you know, I like to give people an opportunity. Teach me something. I said, teach me one of your words in your native tongue. Tell me how to say something. We had a conversation about that, and he was telling me how to roll the R and Erchard, and I was almost a little Hebrew sounding in some parts of the word. And And it was nice, not just me talking to him in English, telling him how to say things. And I said, well, I'd like to ask you some questions. I said, if you don't understand them, then you can tell your brother in your native tongue, and he can tell me. If you can't find the English, it's not your native tongue. So asking you to talk back to me in English may not be fair. I said, so if you want to say something to me, and if you don't know how to say it, then say it in what is comfortable for you in your way. And your brother will explain it to me. And so he did a very good job of not needing his brother to explain most to me, actually, 10 years old. And I asked him about life and friendship. And I asked him, do you love your brother? I said, you have a good older brother. I would love to have had him as my older brother. I said, do you love him? He goes, yes. I said, how do you love him? How do you show it? And he goes, well, I tell him and I hug him, I kiss him. And I said, well, that's an expression. I said, but how do you show him? I said, if you had no lips and you couldn't kiss him, how would you show him that you love him? If you couldn't speak and you were mute, how would you tell him that you love him when you can't say, I love you? If you have no arms and you can't wrap your arms around him to hug him, how would you demonstrate that you love him? And he thought and he was thinking, because that's a deep question, isn't it, for most of you adults? And he started to think about that. And I said, let me say it differently. Maybe it's hard to express it that way. I says, do you have any friends? You have any good friends? He goes, yeah. I said, well, you're 10-year-old boys. I doubt that you're doing a lot of kissing the way you would do your brother or your family. I said, so how do you show them? How do you show the boys that you hang out with? You got a best friend? He goes, yes. So how do you show him that you love him? How do you guys express love to each other? And again, at 10 years old, I know there's not a lot of hugging and kissing going on. So how do you do it in that case? And he was able to explain to me the relationship with his friends. And I said, so things that you share in common. I said, do you share everything in common? You don't share everything in common, do you? Are they only your friends because you share? Do some of your friends like a certain music that you don't like? He goes, yeah, he likes this style of music and I like that style. I said, but you're still friends. He goes, yeah. I said, how do you deal with that? When you got a radio, something one wants to listen to another thing. He goes, we take turns. So you respect the difference. Yes. And I allow, sometimes I listen to his music, sometimes I listen to mine. I said, well, do you ever get into an argument? You ever fight? They're still your friends. You ever get in a fight? And I love what he said. I said, how do you do with that? Because you love them, right? How do you show them your love when you fight? He goes, well, we usually take a break from each other for a while. I'm like, oh, not bad. I said, what hot drink do you like? He says, hot chocolate. I said, do you just drink it the moment, or do you let it cool down to get? Yeah, I let it cool down to get to the part where it's not too cold, warm, and it's definitely not too hot. So you take a break from it before you drink it, and so that you can enjoy it at the right temperature. He goes, yes. I said, well, that's the same way. So you ever had pizza? You have lot pizza. What do you do when it's hot and you want to heat it? He goes, I cut it in smaller pieces. I'm like, that's one way of dealing with it. What's the other way? Well, I let it sit for a while. I'm like, exactly. I said, so you know how to take a pass, take a break. You also know how to like break things down in smaller pieces, break up the argument and say, well, let's talk about something else, a part of a smaller piece of the argument. So you build up to what the main issue is, right? I said, other times you just breathe for a while, just calm yourself. Don't talk so fast. Let it cool down before you speak. Because yes, I said, what about your parents? They love you? Yes. Do they ever spank you, shake you a little bit when they get mad or raise their voice? You told me. You said your parents love you. Yes. And you love them. Yes. But sometimes, are they always talking in a high pitched voice? Or do they use the bare voice once in a while? Because, yes. I said, how do you feel when they do that, when they correct you? He goes, well, it doesn't feel good at the moment, but it's to make me to be a better person. I say, yes, he understood it. Had a wonderful conversation. It was hard to talk to his adult brother from he and I talking. I don't think that you should talk to children and constantly reduce them to just Mickey Mouse, Disneyland, cotton candy, jump, drop, throw, fun, giggles and gaggles. I think you destroy their development. While that is some part of childhood, do not define that as childhood. They will take that into adulthood. And all they'll ever look forward to is the weekend when they can be wild because you haven't taught them to have joy in the week, in their work. Joy is only associated when you're with your buddies. You got a cocktail on the beach, you're going to a party. That would be the wrong teaching.
Amen. So be very intentional the way you raise up your children, the way you grow up yourself. Remember that we are all created in the image of God for the purpose of living our lives with God. It's not a matter of religion, it's just a matter of this is what life is. We have a creator and he designed us to know him. And the way to do that is to grow in righteousness, to mature, to chase wisdom and understanding and develop not just your flesh, but your mind. Not the ball between your hands and between your legs, but the one between your ears. And unless you are so careful on the way you raise up your children, they are going to fall into the hands of Mickey Mouse and the rest of his associates. Anything that is of this culture, in this world, on television, in the school system, on the gangs, in the streets, you name it. If you don't raise up your child, somebody else will.
And you definitely cannot raise up your child if you have not raised up yourself. You've got to take the log out of your eye before you can attempt to take the speck out of your child's eye. There was a great old film, Mastership. There was an old grandfather captain who was raising his grandson, and wasn't certain if his grandson should be raised on the water or raised on the land. And while the kid is going through testings at the school to determine his status, the child would have assignments he had to complete at home. The grandfather's not an academic, he's a seaman. And when the child would say things, the grandfather didn't want to appear he didn't know. He would take a moment and a break. He would go back in his library and grab a book, look it up, and then come back to the table where the grandson was sitting and, oh, well, son, let me explain that to you. So you see, there's a responsibility we have as if you are a parent, get your act together before you try to get your child's act together. You have a wife, I get that. If you must grow spiritually with her when you should have been grown before you met her, okay. But you don't grow spiritually with the children you raise. You should already be grown. Those lessons are not lessons children should be learning while you're learning them. That's typically not the way that works. Nobody wants to go to a company, work for a man who's still learning what he just told you to come and he hired you to do. That's a problem. That's a problem. So grow yourselves, especially while they're young. Prepare yourselves spiritually and take your time. Do not follow the crowd of what others are doing. Go before the Lord on your knees, you and your wife. Seek God's advice and counsel. And if you're looking at what she's doing and he's doing and they're doing, or even worse, how you were raised, which 7 times out of 10 wasn't right either. You're supposed to be improving. Well, my parents raised me and I turned out all right. No, you didn't turn out all right. But you're in denial, and it's not just a river in Egypt. You're not honest about doing even better. You don't have to be bitter, hateful about what they did. Your parents, for whatever reason, did what they did. Maybe somebody came in their life and tried to correct them and they resisted the correction. My father used to say all the time, well, the belt's good for you. It was good for me, and my father was beat with the belt, and he beat us with the belt, so I'm beating you with the belt. A lot of parents, a lot of boomers grew up this way. God's way is better. And in many cases, those who did not have parents that were godly raising them God's way is better. And sometimes there is a better will to be invented. There's a better way to raise the child according to God, not necessarily according to you. You are not the measure. So when you're seeking the wisdom of God, they say AI lacks wisdom, it lacks discernment. It always needs a human involved. No matter how advanced, it's going to always need a human involved. Well, a human made it. And humans come good, bad, and ugly. When the king is righteous, the people rejoice. The word king by itself doesn't mean righteous. When the king is righteous, the people rejoice. When the AI has the right human, it can become a tool of great advancement and good. We know that most are not good, and that should worry you. You have to be, as Guy said, intentional.
Amen.